UGA and like the Athens community.
Typical academic.
Right. Yeah, right. So hearing and communication improvement. So I thought we'd get started with talking about ears and hearing a little bit and how that's relating to communication in general. And this is a 3-series class. So I'll kind of let you know what we'll be talking about in the next class as well. So we'd start with how we hear, because that I'm going to tie that into the communication aspect of it. When we hear, sound wave enters the ear, goes through the ear canal, passes by the eardrum, and then these 3 bones just kind of act as a channel to deliver sound on to where it needs to get to. Finally into this snail-shaped piece called the cochlea. And inside your cochlea, you have these hair cells that are normally standing up straight. Sound wave comes along and kind of bends the tops of the hair cells, and that's what ultimately sends the signal to your nerve and to your brain that you've heard something. So that's the kind of sense organ of your hearing, but then it's your brain's job to interpret what it is you've heard. And that comes into play, it's pretty important. So let's take a look at a typical audiogram, or what you would get when you have your hearing tested. So along the side, we have intensity and how loud. So up at the top, we have very soft, down to very loud. And then along the top, we have frequencies or pitches, so low to high pitch. Most people who have hearing loss, either from age or noise, certain medications, they're going to affect the higher frequencies first. So when we think about that little snail-shaped organ with the hair cells in there, the first hair cells that are hit with sound waves are the ones that are responsible for sensing higher frequencies. So they're the ones that are just get bombarded with noise and just over time, just that constant bombardment of the sound wave. So most people are going to lose their hearing in the high frequencies first. So a typical hearing test result might look like kind of like a ski slope, where you have good hearing in the low pitches. You can sense the very soft, low frequency sounds. And then as the frequencies get higher, it just kind of ski slopes down. Now that's important because the speech sounds that are up there in that soft, high frequency range give speech a lot of meaning and a lot of clarity. So you all can probably tell me, what's the #1 thing people complain of when they complain about their hearing? It's not that I can't hear. They say, I can't understand, or I heard you, I just couldn't make it out. That's usually because you hear the low pitches fine. You're hearing vowels, you're hearing the power of speech, but you might be missing some of these consonants. Now, coincidentally, some of these sounds I can make louder. If there's an E sound, I can physically say E, or I can say E. I can make it really loud. Now, an F as in Frank, just try it. You can't make it any louder. If you ask someone to repeat and they raise their voice, they can't make that any louder. So that's mainly what we're trying to not restore, but what we're trying to address when we're talking about improving communication. It's not a volume type of thing. It's not making anything louder. It's making it more clear and making it easier to make out. Because how many of you have, maybe you're in a noisy restaurant and instead of asking someone to repeat, you do what? You do the smile and nod. You're all together for Thanksgiving, everyone's talking, and you're just kind of sitting at the table and smiling and nodding along because it gets tiring to either, number one, ask people to repeat, but number two, try to figure out what they were saying. That can get pretty exhausting, is that constant, based on the conversation, let me try and figure out what they said rather than interrupt and ask them to repeat. You just try to kind of get by, and that's pretty exhausting.
And it also depends on who it is talking. If it's a female who has a typically higher pitched voice, and you have sound or hearing loss
Yes.
in the upper pitches, it's harder to talk to the guys.
Right. Women and children tend to be more difficult because of the higher pitched voices. I'm not a good example. I tend to have a higher pitched voice, but I'm also projecting and I'm making the effort, and not everybody is going to make that effort. So we're going to be talking about how that comes into play. We call it communication strategies. So we'll talk about that. But the other thing that can happen with this is the mishearing. So I believe, yes, I think you need a hearing test, and he thought he heard, why the heck do I need a hairy chest? He heard her just fine. He just didn't get a couple of those consonants, which changed the entire meaning. So again, not a volume issue, it's a clarity issue. So what do we do about it? Yes, of course, one of the recommendations is devices. Let's give you back these higher frequencies that I can't physically make any louder. We need a hearing aid to give you back those frequencies. So of course, yes, the recommendation is usually precision fit hearing aids. Another option is a cochlear implant. If hearing aids are not doing it, if your hearing loss is severe enough that you're not benefiting from a hearing aid, then the next good option is a cochlear implant. And then, of course, you've all heard about over-the-counter devices, and then straight amplifiers. Let's talk for just a few minutes about, there's a difference, a big of course, cost difference between precision fit, over the counter, and amplifiers. So let's go back here. An amplifier can only make things louder. It's just an amplifier. And so those are the ones that you're going to see for around $300. They make everything louder to the same degree. Now, if I make this E sound as loud as I'm trying to make this F sound, F as in Frank, it's going to overpower that F as in Frank. And it's going to be louder, but you're still not going to be able to hear anything. So people who have that kind of ski slope hearing loss, an amplifier sometimes defeats the purpose, makes things worse. Now, over-the-counter devices are good. I'm really glad that that's available, because what if, you have a headache and all you need is a Tylenol? Well, great. That's a good, inexpensive, available option instead of, say, a narcotic for just a headache. Now, on the other end of things, if I'm having surgery and someone hands me an Advil, not going to be too happy about that. So there's a time and a place for both of these things. Now, a precision fit hearing aid is going to be better able to reach those soft, high frequency sounds and leave these low pitches alone. And then it's more precisely fit as far as measurements to make sure that we are in fact reaching those speech sounds. And an over-the-counter device is just that, it's a device. So the business model behind a lot of them is, I liken it to, there's a car wash franchise in Boston called Scrub a Dub. You go there, you pay money, they give you the bucket and the soap, and they say scrub a dub. You go wash your car. So an over-the-counter device, you buy the device, and then they say, now here, use your phone, you set it to how you like it. Whereas the more prescriptive fit hearing aids or precision fit hearing aids, the audiologist or whoever is working with the hearing aids, we do it. And we take measurements to make sure that we're reaching what we need to be reaching. But that's not all that's involved, because it's pretty unrealistic to say, well, you've probably had this hearing loss for a little while. It likely didn't happen overnight. So it's pretty unrealistic to say, now here's a hearing aid, you can hear. So that's where what we call oral rehabilitation comes in. And that's the majority of what this kind of 3 class course is all about, is the oral rehabilitation. Anyone can buy a device and have it fit, but that's not it. That's not the end. We need to kind of like physical therapy. You had the surgery, but you're certainly not going home and walking after a hip replacement. You need the rehab. So in the case of hearing loss, yes, we've treated the hearing loss with the hearing aid, but now we need to get your brain to make sense of all of those high frequencies that we're giving back. That, to be honest, it can sound a little sharp and distorted at first. So we need to train the brain to make better sense of those sounds. And I've kind of divided it into 4 categories. We have communication strategies, auditory training, accessories, and advocating. And then among communication strategies, we have strategies for those who have hearing loss, and then strategies for those communicating with people who have hearing loss. So let's start with those who have hearing loss. So if I tell you about, if I go on a long anecdote and there was a part that you didn't hear, it's pretty frustrating for someone to then just say, huh? Because now I've got to go through the whole thing again. So if I was communicating, if I had a hearing loss and I was communicating with someone and I didn't get what they said, a better option would be to say something like, I heard you talking about the dog, I just didn't get the last part. This way, number one, they know I was listening and paying attention, but they also know, okay, I don't have to repeat the entire thing, I just have to repeat that last part. Because what happens if they're repeating an entire thing? At that last part, a lot of people drop their voices right at that critical moment. You ask them to repeat and you still didn't get it, because they might have started off projecting well, and then their voice kind of trails off at the end, and you still didn't get that little end that you missed the first time. Practice. So in the next session, we're going to be talking about something called auditory training, which there are some programs that you can do online where it takes speech and puts it in difficult listening conditions. So usually that means speech where there's a lot of background noise, like in a restaurant. Or it could mean speech that's sped up, because what's your complaint about teenagers? Teenagers, they talk
to the floor, they mumble.
They talk to the floor and they mumble. They also talk too fast, right? If they would just slow it down sometimes.
You're not counting the different vocabulary.
Right, that's true. You have to know the lingo too, right? But so practice and we'll talk about that. Embrace your hearing aids. How many people say, well, I have hearing aids, they're in my dresser drawer. You've got to wear them to make them work for you. And the best way to do that is to wear them all the time. And the reason for that is because even if you're home by yourself and you think, well, what do I need them for? There are sounds going on around you that I need your ears and your brain to take in and to sort out. So that when you're wearing your hearing aids and your brain says, okay, that's the dishwasher, that's not important. Speech is what's important. So that when you are in a more difficult situation, a larger group, your ears and your brain are already used to kind of filtering out the unnecessary sounds and focusing on speech. So wearing them all the time is a good idea. And that there's also research that backs that up, that the speech processing area of your brain will unfortunately atrophy if it's not stimulated like it should, so that your ability to understand speech will decline if it's not stimulated. So give it as much stimulation as you can, and one way to do that is by wearing hearing aids. And then communicate your needs to people you're speaking with. Don't just assume that they are practicing good communication. And that could mean your position. Everything is electronic these days. You might be sitting across from your physician and you may think, well, I shouldn't have any issue there. But they're looking down and typing. And that obviously isn't the best communication strategy. You facing people and having the sound of your voice going out instead of down, and then being able to use visual cues. We all know that mask wearing, while that serves a purpose, you're out your visual cues now, and you're just relying on your ears. And audiologists were quite busy during mask wearing because everyone realized, when I'm just relying on my ears, I'm having a whole lot more difficulty.
Can
Yes.
I ask, this may be off the wall.
That's all right.
And if it's really trivial, don't bother. Less risk of falls. Okay,
Yes.
I've had a background in aviation.
Okay.
And we talk about the semicircular canals,
Yes.
your body's false impressions. Your attitude gyro is what's telling you where you are, not how you feel.
Right.
And I just don't see how hearing aids reduce the risk of falls. I'm familiar with the ears as
Mhm.
being the center of stimuli or telling you what your balance is,
Right.
but I don't understand how hearing aids reduce falls.
All right, let's talk about that for a minute. There are two theories as to why treating hearing loss, those who treat hearing loss have a lower risk of falls. One of those theories is that your brain is constantly making decisions based on the information it's getting. A lot of times you're not even aware that your brain is making those decisions. But let's say, for instance, there's some information your brain gets from feedback as to your talking, and sounds are kind of bouncing off of different surfaces. It could very well be that if your brain isn't getting the right feedback, maybe you clipped the edge of the table, right? Where you otherwise would have, your brain would have sensed that, and you might not have even have been aware.
So it's the perception rather than,
Yeah,
okay, than the actual
well,
mechanical.
mechanical, right. The
Work.
other The other reason is this, you're going to hear this phrase over and over, because it's a big phrase called cognitive load. So if your brain is constantly working in overdrive to make up for deficiencies in certain areas. So of course, I'm an audiologist, I'm going to talk about hearing loss. Suppose the speech processing area of your brain is not getting the information it's expecting. It's in kind of a stressed condition. It will start borrowing from other areas of the brain that are not meant for speech processing, usually the area of short-term memory. And then that area is in unnecessary stress because it's doing something, a task that it's not meant to be doing. And if you're kind of constantly trying to put together what was said rather than just hearing it, and if your brain is making decisions and saying, it sounded like she said, put it in the sink, but she must have said, put it in the sink. If it's constantly having to make those corrections and fill in the missing pieces, it's going to put the brain into unnecessary stress, which is going to affect your brain's ability to, again, make decisions about where you are in space, and just put the whole thing under unnecessary stress.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, some of these are quite obvious. But these are strategies communicating with someone who has hearing loss. And, you know, a lot of them are obvious, but we all need some reminders, right? So my mother-in-law is deaf in one ear, has an age-related hearing loss in the other ear. She's been deaf in one ear for 50 years, and my husband still will ask her a question with his head in the refrigerator. She's not going to hear it, and you would have thought that 50 years of her having one ear, he would remember, he would realize, oh, right, I should face her when I'm talking. So gaining someone's attention first, it's quite easy for family and friends to be the worst communicators, to talk to each other from other ends of the house. And still expect each other to hear that. Or, you know, I'm told that I need a hearing test. I get one, but it's because I'm at the sink doing dishes. So the water's running, I'm not facing anybody, and they're asking me something from across the room. I'm not going to hear it. And no one's expected to. So, be in the same room facing each other, get their attention first before you start telling a story. Maintaining eye contact. We do get a lot of information from visual cues, so those masks were quite difficult. And then, you know, so down here, recognize that the ability to process speech can be affected by fatigue and illness. So just like I was referring to before, if you're under some kind of stress, it's going to be harder to make out what was said because your brain is already busy processing whatever else is going on. So it's not uncommon for people to come in and tell me, you know, my spouse had a stroke a couple of months ago, and I feel like I'm having so much more difficulty hearing lately. Your hearing hasn't changed. You're just under a lot of stress, and you're busy processing other things to the point where your brain it's in overload. It can't fill in the missing pieces because it's busy doing other things.
Do you believe you can't see that?
I know, no, I should have realized that. But the most important ones I have on the next slide that you can see.
Yeah.
The most important ones are whenever there's a hearing loss involved. Decreasing distance from who or what you're trying to hear. There's a reason I came out from behind this desk. Decreasing distance is going to really improve the sound quality. Of course, you all know if someone's again on the other side of the room, your spouse, your children are calling to you from the other room, you're not going to make out what they said. You're going to hear them, not make it out. And then reducing background noise is maybe the biggest. So, noisy restaurants, that's the biggest issue. People will come in time after time and say, if I'm just sitting with someone one-on-one, I'm fine. It's when I'm in a restaurant that I have difficulty. And yes, treating hearing can help that. However, managing distance and managing background noise are going to help more than anything else. So background noise can mean a lot of different things. It can mean a noisy restaurant, but it can also mean some homes. Not that there's a lot of noise going on in a home, but reverberation is a big one. A lot of homes, it's pretty, but you have this more open floor plan, high ceilings, big windows, granite countertops, hardwood floors, and there's a lot of reverberation. That's a very difficult situation to listen in. Did I just describe your home?
Pretty much.
If there were more like area rugs and pillows and curtains, things to absorb the reverberation, that's going to make it easier. So if you're having an important conversation and you're in a great room, move over into like the little living room with the carpet and the pillows. Car is the worst situation. You're competing with car noise, road noise, and you're not facing each other. So you're out visual cues and your voices are going out instead of toward each other. And forget it if there's someone in the back seat. So a car is just notoriously bad for important conversations. Because of a lot of these.
That is something that, and I have hearing aids.
Mm-hmm.
And when my granddaughter is in the backseat of the car, even without the radio on, she's 6 years old.
Right.
It's all I can do to hear her.
Yes.
And she and I mean, I've got these things. I'm literally like this back there trying to hear what she's saying.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes, because of the noises in the car, even with the windows rolled up and everything,
Yes.
and these expensive
I
things, it's
know.
like I don't hear those sounds. It's not that I
Right.
don't hear her, but it's what you're saying. I don't hear,
Can't make it out.
and I'll say, you know what? I cannot hear you.
Right.
We're gonna have to try this a different way.
Yes.
You know.
Well, you're in good company.
I think it was.
Even, and I can't hear mine, it's a minivan, of course, but so they're in the third row, so their voices have to travel a couple of seats,
Mhm.
and they've got seats in front of them, so their voices are going into these padded seats. So a car is really, really difficult, and that's kind of a, well, it is what it is situation. There's not a whole lot to be done about that. But for just communicating, but knowing that helps. So, you're not expected to hear that.
So that's reassuring.
Still wear your hearing aids.
Yeah, I get up, put them in,
Right,
take them off last thing.
perfect. So the next class, yes.
Problem is the telephone. I have great difficulty.
Telephone and television have, so both telephone and television have a reduced frequency range. They only are able to work off of certain frequencies. And if there's a hearing loss involved and you have a reduced frequency range, we run into some trouble.
Yeah.
You're also out your visual cues. And if you're talking about cell phones, well, signals aren't great, or you might be on speakerphone, or the person you're talking to might be on speakerphone and there might be noise going on. Landline phone, great. Most people do really well with a landline phone. On the other hand, with a cell phone, you can put it on speakerphone and use 2 ears, and 2 ears are always better than 1. So a telephone can be tricky depending on what we mean by telephone. So do you happen to have a landline phone, or are you talking?
I do, and I have a caption.
Yes.
Well, it's not living up to its reputation.
Caption telephones are typically, they should, on paper, they should be a good option. Because number one, they are amplified quite a bit. But they also caption it so that your brain likes redundancy, and if you can see it and hear it, should be better, right? So if someone's rattling off a phone number and you think they said 9, but it was a 5, you can see that. But that is a third party who's typing that out.
Sometimes it's AI based software.
It is.
And what happens is they will say something and you see it on the type screen and you may hear it and it's
It doesn't
close
Right.
and it's, if you sound it out, it's
You can
what they said,
right.
but it's not the word that they said.
You're right, they make mistakes. So anything that's captioned makes a mistake, whether it's a live person or artificial intelligence trying to interpret what was said.
Can you recommend a caption phone?
The one I recommend is the one you have. Yeah. Now, with a telephone, with you do have a couple of other options when it comes to telephones. One option, and there's a gentleman who comes to Ollie to talk about, it's called T-coils. A T-coil is a very good option, an inexpensive option. What it is, in a hearing aid, there's a magnetic coil that's placed in the hearing aid. In every landline telephone receiver, there's a magnet, and the two interact. So it's a direct signal from a landline phone to the coil in your hearing aid, and it's a very good, strong, clear signal. Now, that telecoil in the hearing aid can interact with other things. There's a classroom here that's called looped. There's an actual loop placed around the perimeter of the room. The speaker wears a mic. And remember what I said about this for a mic, and sound has to travel a distance to get to you to be heard. Sound can get lost in that distance. With this telecoil and loop technology that's been around, it's been around for 60 years, the mic sends the signal directly to that loop, and the magnetic coil in the hearing aid picks it up. So it brings the sound of my voice right through your hearing aids, cuts out distance, cuts out background noise, cuts out those two most important things to consider. So anytime we can do that, that's going to be the best scenario. The issue with it is that number one, the place has to be looped, and there just aren't many places here that are looped. we have a classroom here that's looped. UGA has a classroom that's looped. There's a gentleman, Mr. Pennington, who's working on getting things around Athens area looped. The other caveat is that your hearing aid has to have that coil. And because it's, quote, older technology, your recent hearing aid might not have it unless it's specifically ordered and put in there. So for instance, at UGA, we do try to order every hearing aid with a telecoil, just in case you may need it at some point. Doesn't cost us anything more, so we might as well add it in there. Now, your other option with telephones is Bluetooth technology. So with recent technology, you can pair your hearing aid to your phone and it sends phone calls directly through the hearing aid. So again, that direct signal. And then some people can pair the hearing aids to the TV if the TV has Bluetooth, sending the sound of the TV directly to your ears instead of traveling a distance to get to you. So does anyone want to talk about TV for a minute? Because that is another big complaint, is I can't hear the dialogue. It doesn't matter, I can turn the TV up and it's louder, but all I'm hearing is the music or the action. I still can't understand what they're saying.
It's a problem on foreign programs.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, foreign
British accent.
British accents, difficult. But it's also a streaming issue. If it's live TV, that's notoriously easier to hear than if you were streaming something from like Netflix or Amazon. Those streaming services are taking notice and they are having kind of an enhanced dialogue button. So in theory, it should pull the dialogue out a little bit. If it was something like Turner Classic Movies, they had a much better kind of dialogue. They didn't pipe in the music quite so much and the action. Hollywood lately wants us to feel instead of actually make out what's being said. So TV is just another issue in itself. But next class, we are going to be talking about more auditory training. So like I was describing before, taking speech, putting it in difficult conditions, and training your ears and your brain to make better sense of the sounds it's now getting, either through a hearing aid or not. Some people don't have a measurable hearing loss, but there's some damage there. Usually maybe they were around noise years ago, and it's not enough to give them an actual hearing loss that we can measure on a hearing test, but enough that they're experiencing difficulty as if they actually had the hearing loss, usually in background noise. So it's these kind of training programs to help with those difficult situations.
Gary? Hey,
Yes.
Gary, this is Amanda in the Zoom room. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
We might need to loop back a little bit, but we have a question from Liz about the hearing loop. Is installing a loop in a room expensive?
Is installing a loop in a room expensive? It depends on what you consider expensive. Right? So, typical hearing aids are going to range between $3,000 to $6,000 for a good pair of hearing aids, right? Installing a loop isn't going to be that expensive. Now, that could mean different things. If it's a sanctuary and a place of worship, where they already have a sound system and it might compete with other things, they might have to make adjustments for that so that it's not just a rectangular loop. They might have to crisscross to interact with standing waves and other sound systems. And so there might be more expenses with that. But if you were to, let's say, loop your living room, I could be wrong. I haven't looked into it lately, the cost, but I think it would be less than that. You can also loop, I've seen people loop, it's almost like a clipboard. They walk around with a portable, looks like a clipboard loop, so that everywhere they go, if they're going to an important meeting and someone's just sitting right there across from them, that person can now be in their loop, in their perimeter, and the sound of the voice goes right to their ears. And that, again, I don't think that would be as expensive as like a pair of premium hearing aids, something like that. Does that help?
I'm thinking about the community room at the Linden House, which has really poor acoustics. And I was wondering what it would cost and how would you do that? Who would you contact in order to have that installed?
Who would we call? To be honest, I would probably contact this gentleman, Tim Pennington, he's on kind of this mission to loop the Athens community. So I can let him know and contact him.
Harry, actually, Tim Penning is a very active member with us and a presenter, and so it'd be pretty easy, and he's very enthusiastic about the hearing loop, Liz. So if you'd like me to put you in touch with him, I'd be happy to do that.
So Linden House, that's good to know. I've also heard there's someone I know who's like I think she's a master gardener in their meetings over in the Athens Community Center, I think. She said they don't even use microphones or anything like that. So that would be another place that I would kind of look into. And you know, same for Botanical Garden. I think some of their classes. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Thank you.
When is our next class?
I don't know. I can check. Actually, do you know?
Yeah, give me just a second and I can pull it up.
Okay.
In November.
November 15th, I'm hearing.
Okay, thanks. The description says it goes through December 6th, but there's only 3 sessions, so I wasn't sure when the next one, when they would be.
Right, so kind of
November 15th is correct. Mm-hmm.
Right. So kind of a once a month for 3 months. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments that y'all might have about any of this?
What's the difference in hearing aids based on price?
Difference in hearing aids based on price, right? Because I said they can range $3,000 to $6,000 for a pair. They're all going to be, any of the hearing aids in that range are going to be great for one-on-one for small groups. As you go up in technology, it really is the hearing aid's ability to pull speech out of different types of background noise. Because remember I said background noise is different. So the ones that are 3,000 a pair are going to be great for a situation like this. But if there was noise involved, they really wouldn't be able to handle the noise. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, the ones that are 6,000 a pair can say, well, background noise is different. So restaurant noise is different from like wind noise outside, which is different from reverberation in a great room. And let's pull speech out of those different situations. Usually so that you don't have to physically do anything. You don't have to push a button or anything. The hearing aid analyzes the situation and does that for you. Any other questions or comments? All right, so the next class, we're going to be talking about auditory training. And that one I would say come prepared to practice even. Because it does depend on who you're communicating with. Communicating with a 6-year-old is going to be different than communicating with your nurse, right? So we have different suggestions for that. All right. Good. Thank you for coming. Thanks y'all online.
Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
How about two-way radio? Do you have anything on that?
On two-way radios?
Yeah.
Like walkie-talkie?